Hare Krishna, Devamrita Maharaj. Please accept my humble obeisances.
Hare Krishna, Gopal Bhatta, Prabhu.
All glories to Srila Prabhupada. How are you today?
Here in New Zealand, it's a rainy day. I hope you're not disturbed by the sound of pitter patter in the background.
No, not at all.
From the
So
COVID
this is
point of
our,
view, it's a
go
safe
ahead.
place. From the COVID point of view, it's a safe place.
It's a safe place. New Zealand is very safe. In fact, I'll ask you about that in a moment.
Yeah.
Uh, this is our continuing series of speaking to GBC people, particularly about their views of the GBC, their views of ISKCON, its challenges, etc. So those would be some of the broad topics we'll be talking about. You, of course, are a very famous person in ISKCON. Still, some people may not know so much about you. Might you just tell us a few words about yourself, your history, maybe even how you became a devotee, like that?
Well, my karma is such. I was born in New York, and you may not know it, but New Yorkers think that New York is the center of the universe, and I certainly thought that. And I couldn't appreciate at first Prabhupada's criticisms of New York, but I got over that quickly. I'm from a very Christian family, very academically and materially success orientated. Uh, I came to Prabhupada's lotus feet in a way that was unusual for the early 70s. I was fresh out of Yale University, and I couldn't understand the devotees because I wasn't a hippie. And 95% of our clientele back then for ISKCON were hippies. So I was trying to understand what are they doing for the world? Because I was very concerned with solving the problems of the world.
So, how did you end up joining?
I received one of Prabhupada's books and started reading at home every day for 4 hours. I would order more books from the BBT through mail order because I didn't want anything to do with devotees. Reading 4 hours a day for 6 months straight.
Oh,
but then,
wow.
Finally, I got a message from the BBT, a flyer in the mail about the release of Srimad Bhagavatam in its first Western incarnation, not Prabhupada's Delhi version. So I couldn't wait to get it in the mail, so I had to seek out a devotee. And in Port Authority bus terminal in New York, I encountered a devotee and asked what I thought was a very normal question. I just walked up and said, "Do you have Srimad Bhagavatam?" 2 hours later, it's a long story. 2 hours later, I was minus today's equivalent of $10,000. And then the same thing happened a week later. Again, I donated another $10,000. Although I'd never been to a temple before, never had any association with devotees, but I just had read Prabhupada's books and I was softened up. So finally, the devotee, Devi Shakti, Devi Dasi.
Oh, great soul, great soul.
Told me, look, you've given in today's equivalent, I'll give you the figure, $20,000. You might as well go to the temple and see where your money's going to. I said, that's a great idea.
And so when you got there, who was the devotee that you spent the most amount of time with?
I remember so many then. Jayadvaita, then Brahmachari, Romapad, then Brahmachari. So many. The Brooklyn Temple then was a powerhouse in ISKCON. So many senior devotees. The BBT was there.
Let's flip forward many years. You then became an active servant in the entire Russian effort, which at that time, of course, was, you know, oppressive and quite difficult. Tell us a few things about your experiences there.
I specialized in the Eastern Bloc of the Soviet Empire, Eastern Europe,
Mm,
uh, separate from Russia because it was too difficult to combine both. If you were hot in the Eastern Bloc, you couldn't deal with Russia. If you were hot in Russia, you couldn't deal with the Eastern Bloc. It was the most trying circumstance of my life. Uh,
mm,
it seemed impossible what we were doing, but we were driven by Prabhupada's vision. He
mm,
said, if my books are distributed behind the Iron Curtain, communism is finished.
mm,
We thought it's impossible, but we endeavored because we took his words into our heart.
mm.
Very grueling. And
So book distribution, big part of your history. You joined by reading Srila Prabhupada's books. You were active in the Eastern Bloc, which was extraordinarily difficult, but pushing books into the Eastern Bloc.
yes, I organized translation and production of Prabhupada's books in all these languages of these oppressed areas, and I organized smuggling them.
Mm, mm.
Now, as you
And-
can see, I don't look Slavic. So uh, I found out later, I enraged the KGB because they couldn't figure out why they couldn't catch me. Such an
mm.
obvious looking person. It was
And
one
and uh,
different.
uh, and then, in addition to being a GBC member, an ISKCON guru, a sannyasi, you're also the manager of the of book distribution for the BBT. Which division do you serve?
I work with the BBT Down Under, Australia and New Zealand, and I
Mm,
supervise the production of Vaishnav classic Shastras, Lagu Bhagavatamrita, Bhagavat Sandarbha, all these kind of nectarian texts, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu.
mm. And is that through Giriraj Publishing?
That will now be directly through the BBT.
I see. Okay. Okay. Good. Good. Well, that's certainly elaborate history, some of which I actually didn't even know. Um, we have this COVID thing going.
Mm.
Maybe you could tell us briefly the situation in New Zealand, but then immediately move into what you might call, okay, the COVID is the current flavor of the month in terms of world crisis, but generally we're in a constant crisis, one after another, and and maybe tell us, is ISKCON fully prepared to just deal with these crises and take full advantage of them, etc. Topics like that. Let's talk about that for a while.
Well, here in New Zealand, the government went at the COVID situation, in their own words, heavy and hard and early.
Mm,
So right now, there are 0 cases of COVID in the country. And anyone coming from abroad, returning citizens, are stopped at the border, of course, and quarantined for 14 days in a hotel. So it's a very effective and strong and united approach. Within the country, everyone's free to move. It's business as usual. But that business as usual ends at the border.
mm, mm,
When I look at the world situation of COVID, I like to stress that this is a zoonotic disease and that 75%, scientists say, 75% of the emerging pathogens affecting humans are zoonotic, coming from animals
mm.
due to human beings' inappropriate or exploitative treatment of animals.
Mm, mm.
What's going on in the world today is more than just COVID, however. We're just focusing on what's right in front of us. But meanwhile, don't forget, whether you accept the causes of human induced climate change or not, things are happening in nature, and we have to recognize that.
Mm,
Then you've got the nuclear threat. Hey, we all forgot there are 14,000 nuclear weapons still in the world.
mm,
They haven't gone away because of COVID. They haven't gone away because of climate change. So it's really a miracle that, number one, there hasn't been a purposeful nuclear exchange between the major world powers. Number two, there hasn't been an accidental exchange. And then think about nuclear terrorism. That's also a miracle that it hasn't happened. And then the euphemism, or the polite way of saying conflict between India and Pakistan, there hasn't been a regional nuclear war. So all this
mm.
is going on. Meanwhile, since World War II, the world has had a certain order and stability, relatively speaking. That is
Mm.
finished now. The USA's role in the world is much different. New powers like China coming up. There's nuclear proliferation amongst very dubious nations. And then the economy. This COVID is bringing havoc to the world's economies. So,
Mm.
what will the future be? Politically, then, you've got so much turmoil. It's like we've entered, as a global human species, we've entered a phase of intense destabilization and intense disagreement.
So to what extent is ISKCON kind of ready to take advantage of this, or protect ourselves from this, or just in general respond? I mean, it didn't seem initially that ISKCON was responding very well to the COVID thing, although now it seems like we are. But we were almost like laggards in that particular thing. What what about ISKCON? How do they fit into all of this drama?
We need to recognize that our clientele, the population, is very concerned in that what's going to become of my life, especially young people. Like, where are my opportunities? Where how will my ambitions prosper? It's like the world is closing down on me. So you're
Mm,
going to see a marked effect on mental health,
mm,
especially in the first world.
mm, mm,
As far as ISKCON, honestly speaking, we've got a communications problem within our organization, in that we become so variegated, and our communications channels amongst us are very inefficient and inadequate. So therefore, because of that lack of global togetherness, we get bewildered very easily by these international hurricanes that are bearing down on us and hitting
mm,
us
mm,
already.
mm. In one sense, it's kind of strange. The devotional community embraced emailing very quickly, and then it almost seemed like from that point forward, everything else in terms of communication technology and all of that, we then kind of just lagged as opposed to staying ahead of the curve on it, huh?
Well, yes, but I'd also like to add something, that we're dealing with very deep issues at the GBC level, and we're accustomed to dealing with those issues through face-to-face contact. Now, whether we
Mm,
did that effectively when we had the opportunity for face-to-face contact is one thing, but now with COVID keeping us all separate, we're going to really have to come up with effective ways of dealing with the world of ISKCON, even though we can't meet face to face.
mm,
It's
mm,
a challenge.
mm. So fundamentally, our philosophy has fundamentally the answer to all of these crises. Uh, how adept are we at taking the fundamentals and presenting them in a way that people can embrace and understand? In other words, do we have relevancy and relatability embedded in our approach to the societies that we wish to preach to? And if we do or do not, maybe what can we do to improve?
We're transcendental. The material world goes its way. Come on. How dare you bring that point up? We are immune to what's around us. And I can understand justification for that, by the way. I'm just trying to chant Hare Krishna and follow the 4 regular principles. Give me a break, Prabhu. I've got my agenda's full. My bandwidth is overloaded, I'm just trying to wake up early in the morning, and stop offending devotees. And, and here you are talking all this relate to the world stuff. I want to escape, or I just want to keep my job and keep my family together. Have mercy on me.
You started pushing some time ago an effort to, what would you say, for each of our jurisdictions that we're serving in, for those centers and those devotees to actively preach to the constituencies that were in their jurisdiction. Particularly, of course, we've seen Western preaching in the United States and in Europe be less than dynamic, is what you might say, in a kind way. What got you into that, and what were you driving for, and what would you like to see coming out into the future?
Well, you see, what got me into it was my original hope in joining ISKCON. How to affect the whole world. Mm-hmm. During my karmic days at Yale, my professors allowed me to make my own curriculum based on my hope to find knowledge that would solve all the world's problems. And then upon graduation, I told my dean, I don't see much hope for myself in today's materialistic society. He just looked at me, didn't bat an eye, and said, "You are a Yale man, you will influence the world." So my influence has probably been very pathetic, but in any case, I still think that way. And how can Krishna be for everyone? Mm-hmm. Frankly speaking, in many of our first world countries, our beloved, auspicious, fortunate Indian congregation has saved our temples. Yet we still have the challenge of encompassing the broader population. It's something that I've thought about very deeply and struggled with. How to widen the scope.
Now, on some of your, what you might call experiments that later became clearly valuable and viable, tell us a few stories about some of the successes you've had with the Krishna House, or what do you call it?
We have Krishna lounges. We have
Krishna lounges. Right.
We've got mantra lounges. We've got rebranded centers that are focused on the wider population, which, by the way, includes younger Indians who want to be cool and don't go for the traditional approach of their grannies. So, yes, here in New Zealand, I had the opportunity and the space to pioneer and innovate. And so for 25 years, we have been not only making devotees from the local population, but New Zealand's a huge tourist place before COVID, BC, before COVID. 4 million tourists a year, and particularly the young, individualistic, adventurous tourists from first world countries. So that allowed me to interact with all over the world just by being in one place. So I was dealing with British, Germans, Americans, Swedish, French, and I could see they can easily become devotees. I saw this. Just give them the right interface, like Windows is, or like what the Mac operating system is. give them the right interface, not interfaith, interface. And
Mm-hmm.
they go for the chanting. They go for the whole bhakti scene. And so I saw, and I still do, because foreigners are still here in the country in spite of COVID. They don't want to leave because it's so safe here. Last night, I was talking to persons from Germany at our Sunday festival called the Soul Feast, persons from the USA, persons from Canada, and they were just gobbling it all up.
Mm-hmm.
So that made me think the whole world can be like this if we just set up properly. So we have kind of a contemporary setup. You have places in the USA that are doing that also. The Bhakti Center in New York is superlative, but these endeavors take capital and person power.
Mm. And
Whether
when we go ahead, go
whether
ahead.
whether ISKCON is going to change its focus from almost exclusively mundir focused to urban outreach centers for reaching the whole population. Whether ISKCON is willing to do that, let's see. I haven't seen such a commitment yet.
Mm. I'm just wondering, within ISKCON, are there dynamics that kind of create a blockage to take best practices and move them forward? Is there some polarities that affect our united force in preaching? What have you thought about with regard to to that kind of thing? Congregations versus temples, Indian yatras versus Western yatras. Different approaches that like that. There seems to be at times we ourselves struggle. Yeah.
Yes. Is Krishna north, south, east, or west? I'm hoping that Krishna is for everyone. Sarvayoni Shikonteya, Murtiya Sambhavantiya. At the same time, I realize that there need to be different approaches and tactics for different people. So when ISKCON becomes successful at something, it does that thing to the max. And we are so successful at Indian outreach to that fortunate, blessed community. And success brings more success, but it also narrows your focus because you go where the going is good. That's human nature. Meanwhile, the first world, especially socially, is falling apart. And so, to put it frankly, if you want to deal with the Western population, because Indians are also in the West, so I say Western population very hesitantly, but if you want to deal with that Western population, you have to be prepared to deal with persons from a social background that is disintegrating in terms of family structure, in terms of mental stability, in terms of abuse problems. In other words, I advise those few persons who are serious about broad outreach, have on hand a psychologist and a doctor, because that's what's required today. And it's affecting all levels of the broader population. Just like my alma mater has released statistics recently stating that 45% of their undergraduate students seek out mental counseling at least once during their undergraduate stint there. Now,
Wow.
That's the elite level. 45% seek out mental counseling. So this is showing you what's going on. You have a disintegration of society, and it's so much easier to deal with that juicy, sweet, low-hanging fruit. I mean, I do it too. It's so much easier than to have to deal with persons who are from such a disorientated background, and increasingly that background is becoming disorientated.
When we look at Srila Prabhupada's mandate to top management, but then to all devotees of unity and diversity. Some people feel that we've done well to exercise the diversity element within ISKCON. But then in terms of allowing that diversity to be one of the aspects that really bring us together in united force, maybe we haven't made that yet. Could you comment on this dynamic if that's the way you feel?
What preoccupies my attention on the GBC body, and I'll be honest with you all, is the divide, the battle between the so-called conservative faction and the liberal faction. It's very intense amongst Hare Krishnas, no doubt because to be a devotee, you've kind of not done the mainstream thing. You've really taken a special commitment to follow the four regular principles, to chant 16 rounds a day, to forego this, to forego that. And so therefore, your outlook on ISKCON becomes very fervent and very intense when you see someone who seems to have a different outlook on how ISKCON should proceed and what should be our connection to the world. Hare Krishnas tend to get on a high horse and ride. Choose which movement you want to be a part of. It's my way, or else you're no longer loyal to Prabhupada.
So how are we going to overcome that dynamic? I think many of us experience what you just described on both sides, in multiple sides. But how are we going to overcome that?
One side cannot exterminate the other side. Okay, using the standard dualities, polarities, liberal, conservative. To date, neither side has annihilated the other side. They're deadlocked. So the total solution has eluded us in terms of exterminating the opposing party. We're going to have to face the facts that everyone is going to be around for a while. We should be inclusive, and there won't be just one voice speaking. There won't be just one way of doing things. Much as we'd like things to turn out that way, I'd like everyone to think like I think and do what I do. There's no doubt about it, but it's not going to happen like that. So how can ISKCON stress unity more while being pragmatic, recognizing that there are going to be divergent approaches and divergent views? Prabhupada, you can quote Prabhupada and find him, quote, saying this, saying that. You can tailor him to fit practically so many different situations, except follow the four regular principles and chant minimum 16 rounds a day, distribute my books. You find a few things like that. Otherwise, he's so transcendently brilliant. He's so broad. I just saw a quotation yesterday. Sometimes in India, he would say, "What is this welfare work, food distribution?" A month later, there's a famine in Gujarat. We should be distributing food. So to try to fit Prabhupada into our box, our own private box, is practically impossible. And many of us are starting to realize that. So my concern is this liberal conservative polarity.
A major challenge. Going out forward, do you think that the GBC will start to address this sometime soon?
They have to, because this dynamic is not going away. And due to COVID, because there's less face-to-face interaction than ever before, this dynamic will become more intense. Various pockets and factions will become intensified due to a breakdown in regional or international interaction.
Is there some possibility that this dynamic can actually even kind of tear us apart? Is that how big this challenge might be?
Yes, because some of our leaders are very senior and before they leave this world, they want to see things a certain way. Some of our
Mm,
younger devotees, based on their background, where they're from, are also very opinionated and want to see ISKCON go a certain way.
mm,
It's up to the GBC to try to resolve all this. And I
mm,
propose that we need to recognize that there are going to be different views, but nevertheless, how can we create unity? As you
mm,
said eloquently, that we've got heaps of diversity. No one disputes that. But what are we going to do about the unity? How can we make an inclusive organization that is realistic in terms of its recognizing these polarities are going to exist? This is the challenge.
mm.
This is the big challenge. We'll be
It,
measured.
it seems it seems to me that sometimes we desire and require a fair amount of freedom, yet at the same time we have to come to the point where we can agree upon firm boundaries that we won't step beyond, and then take that freedom and run with it. But we have rock solid agreement on our boundaries. Yes, no?
It's very important to balance that individualistic uh, acceptance of challenge, that entrepreneurship, with the necessary institutional unity and checks and balances. How to handle both requires some deep reflection. It's going to test us because you don't want to squelch the individual contribution. As Prabhupada famously wrote, spontaneous, individual, and voluntary. His Grace Vaisheshika Prabhu likes to quote.
Why don't we go deeper into this? I'm hearing a couple of different things from you. One is this individualistic, opportunistic, and entrepreneurial. Srila Prabhupada was even examining him from the entrepreneurial successes of the mundane world, was extraordinarily successful. And he started with nothing. The classic entrepreneur, uh, moving throughout the world and never stopping to increase the movement, etc. Yet at the same time, he was always ringing a bell over here, and even taking steps to establish a bureaucracy, not in the use of a negative sense of that word, but the positively. He needed things to be organized, etc. I really want you to tell our audience and tell me. I wish to be educated on this. How are we going to keep this entrepreneurial spirit while at the same time staying organized and staying unified? This is a big topic, Maharaj. Speak as long as you want on this.
Yes, it's something I've thought about deeply. Let's take some quotations, and I say some quotations from Prabhupada about how he picked his leaders in the days of old. He said to Tamal Krishna Maharaj, I look for those who sacrifice the most for preaching. He
Mm,
told Sam Sundar Prabhu, I look and see who's got energy, who's got spirit. That is always needed, not simply in the pioneering phase. Sometimes devotees think, oh, that's that old stuff, the Wild West, cowboys shooting them up, but now things have settled down. I say, no, you need that always. At the same time, you need devotees who are expert in the corridors and offices and assembly rooms of the necessary institutional bureaucracy. And I use that word not in a negative way.
mm, mm,
Those two types of devotees need to get along because often in the past, it was the individualistic pioneers versus the bureaucrats. And that's not going to work anymore. I recognize that there are leaders who are so expert in just working the corridors of the institution to bring everyone together and organize things, whereas they may have never done any personal pioneering for Prabhupada's movement. But what they're doing in terms of organizational prowess, I say, is also pioneering. So therefore, somehow or other, we have to recognize we need both.
This is also a polarity that needs to be managed. These several different kinds of devotees, entrepreneurial versus bureaucrat.
Yes, because without both, you're going nowhere. You asked about my Soviet Bloc days after I left the BBT in Los Angeles upon the disappearance of Srila Prabhupada. I was production manager, but I recognized with his presence no longer on the planet, the book distribution, the book production wouldn't go on at its usual marathon pace. So I heard, if you want the special mercy from Srila Prabhupada, you go preach in the Soviet countries or the Muslim countries. So that appealed to my individualistic spirit. Okay, go out and get the mercy against all odds. But I also have another side that, hey, after you're pioneering, sooner or later, and it's often sooner, you're going to wonder, where's the stability? Where's the organization? And how are things going to go on after I'm gone? So I can't be the all in all, although I'm getting such an enthusiastic rush pioneering and trailblazing. Nevertheless, just like when it comes to the cosmic manifestation, Vishnu has to do the maintenance. Maintenance is tough, but it must be.
Maintenance is actually harder than creation sometimes, yeah?
Yeah. So I have these discussions with my youngest brother. I think I told you my youngest brother is Chief Administrative Officer for Toyota North America, and he's more to the corporate bureaucratic side than I am. I was kind of the individualist of the family, always looking for trails to blaze economically, academically, but he's Mr. Conciliatory. He was even at the White House a few weeks ago meeting with Trump and Pence. I won't say any comment either way, but that's how conciliatory he is. So I have these discussions with him, and these discussions affect even material organizations. How do we encourage our go-getter people while at the same time having a structure that provides stability, accountability, and so on? So naturally, ISKCON is going to be affected by this because we're operating in the material world.
Maybe we should just spend a minute with that. We're a transcendental organization. We're not within the material world.
That's right. We're Swami. You got it right. I 100% agree with you.
I guess there was a time when we even thought that we didn't even have a material body. I guess at this point now we're recognizing that it's getting older, like every other material body.
Prabhupada so brilliantly utilized our youthful enthusiasm. I'm staggered when I think about how he so expertly did the right thing at the right time. He was the master of the moment as well as the master of the long range. I can't conceive of how he's done what he's done.
So yeah, when we look out into the future, and if we just project the success that we've had so far, and I'll just give you one example in detail, and then I'll just briefly examine the other ones. We have approximately 1.5 to 1.75% of Srila Prabhupada's disciples who became initiating gurus. If that same percentage holds, within a generation, we're going to have 3,000 gurus on the planet, maybe 4,000. Now, if we look at temples, Srila Prabhupada departed with 108. We now have anywhere from 700 to 900, depending on where the count is. By the way, we don't have an administrative, bureaucratic group of people that keep track of how many temples we have very well. We could, yeah, exactly. We could have 3,000. We could have 4,000 temples. That means 3,000 or 4,000 temple presidents. Right now, we have 5,000 official congregational groups, Namhata groups, congregational groups. Those people are leaders. They're providing shelter and guidance to the people within their groups. We have a need in a generation for 10,000, 15,000 leaders. And all of the dynamics that you've been speaking about, the polarities between the conservative, the liberal, the dynamics between diversity versus unity, the need to be entrepreneurial against the what are these leaders going to look like going out into the future? What's your vision of a leader in ISKCON? What should that person be?
My first question would be, where are they? I feel that we're facing a succession crisis. Not only is the old guard, old timers like me, not only are we aging and nearing the end of our journey in this world, but there are huge gaps in ISKCON administrative coverage, ISKCON preaching and devotee care coverage in the world. Where is the person power going to come from? So sometimes I think maybe we old timers have made the job look too difficult. It's like if you're not a kamikaze, if you're not, ready to live in a firehouse 24/7, and as soon as the bell rings, the siren sounds, you jump into your fire engine and race off any hour of the day or night. If you're not willing to do that, you can't be a leader. So I think we're going to really have to consider our succession problem and take it head on. How are we going to train a new generation of leaders? How are we going to keep them united? Because right now we have a severe shortage, at least outside of India. We have very few persons who want to take up ISKCON leadership, and that is a great problem. And I wonder, why is it so? You remember I remember when you were president of the LA Temple, 20 persons wanted your job. I remember it used to come into my office at the BBT. Devamrita, how am I going to get them all out on Sankirtan? You were feeling Prabhupada's burden. There were so many people in the community. I know. I could do his job better. Yeah, I'm just waiting. He gets Prabhupada Association. I want that. I thought that too. I thought that by positioning myself to be in charge of Prabhupada's book production, I was sure to get his association. So I learned everything about it. And then when I saw the current production manager dip in his effectiveness, I was right there. Okay, here I am. Now I get Prabhupada's association. But that's when Prabhupada began his final pastime of illness. So after that, I said, okay, I'm going behind the Iron Curtain. I've got to get the mercy somehow. So my point is that there was this eagerness. There was this desire to take up responsibility as an expressway back to Godhead. Now, perhaps we old devotees have failed to inculcate that spirit in the younger ones. We'll take the blame, or at least I'll take the blame, but maybe that's what's happened. Prabhupada had us jumping, and I see that there are amazing new leaders amongst the grand disciples of Prabhupada, but they're not as many as we need. We need a whole wave. When you were temple president of LA, there was a wave of persons who wanted to do something for Mahaprabhu. So we've got to figure out how to recreate that spirit in the present circumstances, which are different.
I'm going to apologize if I'm putting you a little bit on the spot. I serve the GBC nominations committee as a facilitator. Bhakti Chaitanya Maharaj is our chairman. I'd like you to seriously consider joining that team because we do need several GBC members. And just based on your realizations of what you just described, I feel that we would, as a team, benefit from your association. So, of course, to be gracious, I won't ask you for a commitment in this interview, but I want you to please consider that.
I'm touched by your request, and I definitely will consider very deeply, and I'm moved by it. And it's something that I feel strongly about. And so perhaps I should put my actions where my mouth is.
We're getting near the end of our time. I'm struck with multiple things that you've said, but to bring our time together to a close, I'd like to just get your comments on the following observation that I have. You have presented dramatic challenges going out into the future in multiple areas of our movement. Yet at the same time, you exude a degree of, not a degree, an exemplary level of enthusiasm and confidence and almost like, yeah, these are momentous, huge problems, but that's not causing you to be the least bit unenthusiastic. How do you maintain this level of enthusiasm that you exude while at the same time examining all these, gosh, terrible, dramatic things that we have to face? How do you do that?
I have to admit, I'm a firm believer in the power of the Hare Krishna mantra. I don't mean to sound, like the church choir or like a true believer, but I am a true believer in the power of chanting Hare Krishna with attention and its phenomenal effects. And I would like to chant with more attention. Secondly, I am constantly amazed by Srila Prabhupada's achievement, and I feel so indebted to him. I don't know what would have happened to me without him. Karmically, you could say I was on my way to great success, but I don't buy it. Without Krishna, my life would have been a disaster. I'm so grateful to Prabhupada, and because of that indebtedness, I push on. And I've seen Krishna consciousness trying to take root in the most impossible circumstances in the Soviet bloc. And we, dealing with that place, it's like Prabhupada telling you and pointing to dry land and telling you it's the ocean, swim. That's how inconceivable it was. You can do it. It must happen. So I've had that experience of being up against impossible odds. Briefly speaking, I'll tell you, we first started smuggling like 5 Ishopanishads into a country, wrapped in aluminum foil in the front engine of a car. And we were so happy. Wow, 5 Ishopanishads into this communist country. Oh, how Prabhupada will be pleased. By the time we ended up, by the time my stint there was over, we were smuggling truckloads of books, 10,000 Bhagavad Gitas at a time into these countries. I could have never predicted such a thing would happen. And we didn't believe that the Iron Curtain would crumble, actually, although Prabhupada said, distribute my books and it'll be finished. We took it on faith, but we didn't expect it to happen. So I've seen impossible transformations. So that's what keeps me, those realizations, those experiences. We can do it. That's what pushes me onward.
It's great, Maharaj. Well, I very much thank you for your valuable time. I'm sure our audience is just totally enthused with all of your insights, and I'm hoping that everybody embraces these challenges that you've outlined and does something to move them forward. Thank you so very much. I think it's time to close now.
For what you're doing, and this is a great way to enable our devotees throughout the world to become more acquainted with their attempting to be humble GBC servants. I thank you.
All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.
Jai.
Jai.